Hello, my name is Keshwani. This Keshwani, Keshwani. We are here because we want to learn algebra. Today is our lesson number 188. Day 188, we are in the process of solving word problems from day 101 through 200, and today is our 88th day of solving a word problem. The problem for today is already on the blackboard. I'm going to read it to you. It says divide 90 into two parts. So our job is to take this number 90, divide it into two parts in such a way that 5 times the greater part, in such a way that divide 90 into two parts so that 5 times the greater part exceeds 300 by the exact same amount as 10 times the smaller part falls short of 250. If you have trouble understanding the question, hopefully you will understand better as we begin to set it up. So, and if you of course understand it quite well, then pause the video, solve it yourself. When you have the answer, you can resume it and compare your work against what we are about to do together. So here's the solution. Here is not a solution, that's not what I meant to say. Here is the solution. That the greater part let's pretend that the greater part equals g. So we are defining variable g for the greater part, g for greater. That would imply, if that were true, then that would imply that the smaller part must equal whatever is left from g. Whatever is left from g. For example, if it turns out that the greater part is 50, if g equals 50, then the smaller part must be 90 minus 50 or 40. If it turns out that the greater part is 89, then the smaller part must be 1. If it turns out that the greater part is 60, then the smaller part must be 90 minus 60 or 30. But the greater part, of course, by definition, would be something more than 45. It doesn't have to be integer, is there, because there is nowhere in the problem it says it has to be a whole number. It's just the greater part is more than 45. So if whatever the greater part is, the smaller part is going to be whatever is left over from 90. Once you subtract the greater part from 90. So that's where that comes from. Let's carry on then. Now we have to understand this part. Let me put it in this part here. 5 times the greater part exceeds 300. How do we present that in the language of algebra? How do we express that in the language of algebra? Well, 5 times the greater part is very simple. Greater part is g. So 5 times the greater part is simply 5 times g. And how do we show the concept of how much it exceeds 300? 5 times the greater part exceeds 300 by what? By whatever this is, 5 times the greater part minus 300. That's all. For example, again, we're going to do the same exact example as before. For example, if the greater part happens to be 50, if g happens to be 50, then 5 times the greater part, or this would not work because 5 times the greater part is only 250. Let's put something here that gives us a positive quantity here. How about 70? Let's suppose the greater part is 70. If greater part is 70, then 5 times 70 is 350. 350 minus 300 is how much this quantity exceeds 300. how much does the 5 times the greater part exceeds 300? The way we find that out is we take that quantity, 5 times the greater part, 5 times the greater number, and from that we subtract 300, and that's the quantity by how much, that's the amount by which 5 times the greater part exceeds 300. Let me give you another example. Let's say, for example, the greater part happens to be, let's say greater part happens to be 80. If the greater part happens to be 80, then how much does 5 times the greater part exceed 300? Well, 5 times 80 is 400, and therefore now the question is, how much does 400 exceed 300? By how much does 400 exceed 300? To answer that question, we take the 400 and we subtract from it. We take away from it 300. By how much does 400? One more time. By how much does 400 exceed 300? Well, answer is 400 exceeds 300 by 100. How did we find that? By subtracting 300 from the 400. That's all it is. So by subtracting 300 from 5 times the greater part gives us the amount by which 5 times the greater part exceeds 300. Alright, enough said. Sometimes I know I have a tendency to explain too much. Now let's do the next part. Let's do the next part. I'm going to put a demarcation here so we can actually keep them separate. Since I use this word and I don't want to brush it off, I'm going to have to leave the room for about 10 seconds so I can get my list of the words so I know which day we covered this word, because I want you to learn it. Just give me about 5 seconds, I'll be right back, okay? The word was demarcation. What I said is that let me put the demarcation here, as I drew this line here. Let me use this in the context. As I put this line here, I said let me put a demarcation from the verb demarcate. And when did we learn this word? Day number 12. If you want to learn this word properly, then in addition to watching this algebra video that you are watching right now, you should also search for my vocabulary videos. Just type in Keshwani Prep -vocab day 12, and you will learn this word demarcate, which means to put a boundary around something, to outline something, to put a border around something. So I said let me put the demarcation here so we can keep this work separate from the work that we are about to do. And that's how you use it in the context. Demarcation. Anyway, it's out of my system, I feel better. Let's move on then. Now we do the second part. How do we express this concept? 10 times the smaller quantity falls short of 250. But before we worry about how to show that part, 10 times the greater quantity, by how much does it fall short of 250, let me ask you this question. If I ask you 240 falls short of 250, by how much? Let me say it one more time. 240 falls short of 250 by how much? Another way of asking the same question would have been 240 is how much less than 250? Well, 240 is 10 less than 250. 240 falls short of 250 by 10. How did we find it? By taking the 250 and subtracting 10 from by subtracting 240 from it. Let's ask ourselves one more question. A 100 falls how much short? Let's pretend 10 times the smaller part. Let's pretend this part is 100. Let's pretend that 10 times the smaller part is 100. So then the question is 100 falls short of 250 by how much? 100 falls short of 250 by 150. In other words, question was 100 is how much less than 250? 100 is 150 less than 250. How do we find it? 100 is 150 less than 250. How do we find it? By taking 250 and subtracting from it 100. Let's do one more. 249, okay, listen carefully. Now the question is 249 falls short of 250 by how much? 249 falls short of 250 by 1. How did we find it? By taking the 249, by subtracting 249 from 250. That is exactly what we're going to do here. The question is 10 times the smaller part. Well, 10 times the smaller part is this thing. The smaller part is right here. Sorry, smaller part right here. Smaller part is whatever is left from the 90. 90 minus g, that's our smaller part. Now we have to take 10 times that amount. This quantity, 10 times the smaller part, this quantity right here, 10 times the smaller part, falls short of 250 by how much? Well, how do we find it? We take the 250 and we subtract this amount from 250. Voila, that's it, that's our answer. There you go. 250 minus 250 minus 10 times 90 minus g. That's the amount by which 10 times, this is the amount, let me put it here. This is the amount by which 10 times the smaller part falls short of 250. Voila. And we are told in the problem that these two quantities equal each other. We are told in the problem that we are to divide 90 in such a way that 5 times the greater part exceeds 300, which is this right here. 5 times the greater part exceeds 300 by this quantity. This quantity by the same amount as 10 times the smaller part right here. 10 times the smaller part, this is the smaller part right here, as 10 times the smaller part falls short of 250. These two quantities are equal to each other. We are almost there. You see, solving the algebra problem, the biggest hurdle in solving the algebra problem is not actually solving the problem. It's actually coming up with the right equation. It is the most important ingredient in the solution. No matter how good you are at solving an equation, if you are not careful in setting it up properly, and if your equation itself is wrong, then it is a moot point. Oh boy. Then it is a moot point as to how good one is at solving the equation. If the bloody thing is not right to begin with, you're going to get the wrong answer. Let's learn this word, moot point. It is a moot point. It doesn't matter how good you are at solving an equation if the equation itself that you came up with is wrong. Moot point. When did we learn this thing? Day number 7. Again, one more time, just type in Keshwani Prep. Keshwani Prep -vocab -day 7, and you will learn this word moot. Okay, so we have our two ingredients, we have our two quantities, and this quantity right here, 5 times g minus 300, will have to equal 250 minus 10 times 90 minus g. That's it. We equate this quantity to that quantity, the rest is downhill. The rest is downhill, we just have to solve for the variable g. Simple linear equation. Let's do it. I need the room, so I'm going to have to erase the top part. Okay? And since we are erasing the top part, this arrow will no longer perform any function, so I'm going to get rid of these arrows also. I need the room, as I said. Five times the greater part exceeds 300 by this quantity. And what does this quantity represent? This quantity represents, this is the amount by which 10 times the smaller part, 90 minus g, falls short of 250. So that part, 10 times the smaller part, so 250 minus 10 times 90 minus g must equal this quantity. Why? Because that's what we are told. We are told that whatever this guy, the greater, 5 times the greater part, whatever it exceeds 300, this guy falls short of 250 by the same amount. Just solve it. That's it. Enough of the talk. So 10 times 90 is 900. Now that scares me because I don't recall seeing 900 when I was solving it. Oh, there is 900. And then negative 10 times g, negative 10 times g. See right here? We have a negative 10 and we have a negative g. That negative times negative is going to become positive. Positive g equals 5g minus 300. Let's subtract g from both sides. Let's subtract g from both sides. Let's add 900 to both sides. Nope, we have to bring this 300 over here. Let's add 300 to both sides. That's it. So 250 plus 300, this is giving us a negative quantity. Did I make a boo-boo? I made a boo-boo. There is a boo-boo in there. Can you catch it? Yes. It's a good thing that we are not going too fast. The boo-boo is right here. Negative times negative is positive, but then we got 10 of them, not just one. 10 times g is 10g. This is a positive 10g. This was a positive 10g. In which case, let's bring this 5g here. Let's subtract 5g's from both sides. So that takes care of that thing. That 300 is going to stay there. Let's bring this 900 there by adding 900 to both sides. Let's bring this 250 to that side by subtracting 250 from both sides. And now we are in business. You see, what happens sometimes is that when one tends to do every single tedious steps one by one, I tend to make mistakes because I'm not used to doing this one tiny step at a time and explaining and so forth. Anyway, that's my excuse, because whether or not you're going to buy it is up to you. Okay, here we go. Positive 10g minus 5g is going to give us positive 5g. And of course, this positive 5g and a negative 5g is going to cancel out, which was the whole point. Negative 900 and a positive 900, that's going to cancel out. And positive 250 and negative 250, that's going to cancel out. And here we end up with negative 300 and a positive 900. This is positive 600 minus the 250. Positive 600 and a negative 250 is 350. So this gives us 350, which is 5g, and therefore divide both sides by g, both sides by 5 rather. Divide both sides by 5, and let's see what we get. This 5 goes out, and how many 5s in a 35? 35 has 7 5s, so it's 70. Voila. That's it. Looks like greater part is 70. If the greater part is 70, which is our g, the smaller part must be 20. At this point, all we have to do is make sure that we put it back in the problem and see if the whole thing makes sense. So we're going to do that now. We need the room again, so I need to raise this bottom part. We no longer need it, obviously. So here is our 90. Here is our 90 that we were given. And what we're claiming is that we're going to break it up into two parts, the greater part and the smaller part. And what we just found is that the greater part is 70. G equals 70. This is our G. G for greater. So if the greater part is 70, then the smaller part must be 20 because they have to add up to 90. Now 5 times the greater part is 350. 350 exceeds 300 by how much? 350 exceeds 300 by 50. Well, let's see what 10 times that quantity is. 10 times this quantity, 10 times the smaller part, 10 times the smaller part. You see, 10 times the smaller part is 200. 200 falls short of 250. 200 falls short of 250 by how much? By 50. 350 exceeds 300. How much? 50. Voila, there you go, they're equal. The difference between this quantity, the quantity by which, listen carefully, the quantity by which 10 times the smaller part falls short of 250 is the same quantity as 5 times the greater quantity, greater number, exceeds 300. Well, that's it, we're done. Excuse me. So we arrived there finally, after so many boo-boos. I will see you tomorrow on day number 189. Alright? Bye now.